I'm Lisa from the Spencer Road Library, and I'm excited that you are joining us this week as we visit some of the magical shops of Hogsmeade from J.K. Rowling's ultra-popular book series, Harry Potter. And I hope you enjoy all the fun that's in store. But now, join me as I recreate some of the magical sweet treats from Honeydukes. Osseo chocolate-dipped wands! Welcome to Honeydukes. Okay, so the chocolate-dipped wands are not a treat from the book series, but this is a pretty great way to start our week in Hogsmeade by making our wands. So I thought it might be fun to make some chocolate-dipped wands. They are easy to make and fun to decorate. You can decorate them after they've been dipped in chocolate with just about anything you have on hand, anything that sounds interesting or tastes good to you. You could use semi-sweet chocolate chips, you could use nuts, which I have some here, you could use sprinkles, the list goes on and on. You can be very creative with these. They're very simple to make. All you need are pretzel rods that look like this. These are going to be the base of our wand. Some chocolate. I like to use almond bark, which looks like this because it already comes divided. It's easy to break. So what I did for this recipe is I chose my little measuring cup because it's kind of deep, and so when I go to dip my pretzel rods in, I'll get, you know, a good portion all the way up the pretzel rod. So I went ahead and took 3 sections of that almond bark, and I will melt those down in the microwave. And then I just have some toppings here for my wand. I have some little sprinkles here that I'm going to do over the bowl because they're a little staticky and they get very messy. Then I have some bits of mint chocolate and fudge, which are actually in kind of big chunks, so I'll have to break those down a little. And then I have already pre-chopped some honey roasted peanuts. So I'm going to get my chocolate melted. I'm going to take 3 of these chunks of the almond bark and put them in the microwave for about, I'm going to do it for about 30 seconds to start and see where I am, because I can always add time. You don't want to scorch the chocolate, so we'll put it in for 30 seconds and see where we are. I might have to put it in for another 30 seconds. All right, and after 30 seconds, this is what my chocolate looks like. It's not quite ready, so I'm gonna go ahead and put it on for another 30 seconds and see where we are. It may be that we just need to start out with a minute. Okay, so after about 1.5 to 2 minutes, this is what my chocolate has looked like. It's pretty well mixed, melted. I've got a couple of chunks in there, but I'm just gonna let that chocolate melt on its own with the rest of the warm chocolate, and I'm just going to stir it with a little knife here, or with a butter knife, and then it's just about ready for us to dip our chocolate. So like I said, this recipe is really easy, but it'll get us started on our week at Hogsmeade. And I'm going to take my pretzel rod and I'm just going to dip it, and you can even roll it if you want. And while it's wet, you want it to drip off the excess. Just kind of let it roll until it stops dripping. It'll look like it's thickening up a little bit. See, I'm still dripping a little bit. Okay, my first one I'm going to do is with the sprinkles. So I'm going to pop my sprinkles open here. I'm going to give it a generous, you can probably see maybe the sprinkles going all over the place. I like to do the sprinkles in a bowl because as I miss, a lot of the sprinkles don't go on the wand, at least they can be contained in the bowl. So, and it's still dripping a little bit. We're going to set it on our parchment paper or wax paper if you have. Set it on something that it won't stick to once it's dry. And then I'm going to go on to my next. The next one I'm going to do is with my nuts. go ahead and dip our chocolate wand there, and I'm just kind of twirling it, trying to get it about halfway up the pretzel. Okay, I'm gonna let it drip, and while it's still wet, I will dip it into my toppings. This one we're gonna do with the honey roasted peanuts. It's gonna get a little bit messy, but that's all right. Can't be afraid of a little bit of mess. You could always mix toppings too. If I wanted to have sprinkles in here with my nuts, I could do that. So this one's really messy. I probably should have let a little more of the chocolate drip back down into my measuring cup, but that's all right. Once it starts to harden, that will be just fine. So that is my peanut one. And now this one I want to do with my mint and fudge. The only thing is that the pieces aren't quite small enough, so I'm just going to break them up with my fingers real quick. I want them to be able to have a good chance at sticking on the pretzel, so I don't want them to be too large. And this will just be like triple chocolate. I'm going to dip it in chocolate, and I'm going to coat it with chocolate as well. But it'll have a much different flavor from the almond bark, because this is mint and fudge. All right, that's okay if I have a couple. All right, so we're just going to dip our wand again. Try to get it about halfway up the pretzel rod. And let it drip a little bit. Get all the excess off. You know, you could decorate these wands, customize them with your house colors. So if you think you're a Ravenclaw or a Slytherin or a Gryffindor, you could decorate them with your colors. This one's really messy. I am just going to help it along a little bit, and I'm going to put some of these pieces on here, and then I'm going to set it aside to dry. I'm not sure if that one's going to work that well. I don't know, we'll try. I'll set it here. These pieces may not have been the ideal. I'll tell you what though, if I chop them up a lot finer, they would probably stick a little bit better. So that's a good lesson. So if you're gonna do something that's kind of chunky, just make sure it's in small chunks so that it can stick really well to the pretzel rod. So there we go. Those are your chocolate dipped wands, and you can carry those with you at your stroll through Hogsmeade this week. And for now, I say, Osseo exploding bonbons. Okay, so the exploding bonbons are a treat that are actually mentioned in the third book of the Harry Potter series, which is The Prisoner of Azkaban. Specifically, you can find it in chapter 10. My inspiration for this popping magical treat came from an article I read in Getaway Today's travel blog written by Adele Belknap back in January of 2016. I chose this recipe because it's very simple and just requires us to assemble a few ingredients, and no oven is necessary. The bonbons in the story would explode in the mouth of the person who ate one, which to me doesn't seem very fun, but when they were banned from Hogwarts, it seemed like a major punishment, so somebody must have enjoyed the explosion. Our bonbons will pop a little bit, but they're not going to explode or blow off your tongue. So I went ahead and made half of my recipe. So the ingredients that you need will actually make almost 24 bonbons, but the recipe I'm going to demonstrate for you will only do half of that because I already made a plate of exploding bonbons, and this is what mine turned out to look like. Okay, so to start off, you need to crush your sandwich cookies. They could be Oreos, they could be the off-brand, whatever. But that's the recipe that we are going to use. So I crushed most of my sandwich cookies, so they're going to look like this into little bits right there. So I just saved 4 of my cookies here, and I'm going to Put them in that gallon Ziploc baggie that were in the instructions, and get most of the air out of the baggie, and then seal it up. And you just want the cookies to be flat. And what I did is I just started crushing them with my fingers. You can get them crushed pretty easily just with your fingers. But then I took my rolling pin. If you don't have a rolling pin, that's all right. You can just keep on crushing with your fingers. So I'm just gonna work on these 4 cookies in this bag to get them nice and small, almost crumb-like, so that when we mix our cream cheese in the cookies, we don't have any big chunks. Just gonna feel them. So probably most of the cream from the cookies is going to stick to your baggie, and that's okay. We don't necessarily need the cream. We just really need the crumbs from the cookie, the chocolate. So I feel 1 piece in there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and open this, and I'm going to add it to the cookie that I already crushed up earlier. I'm just gonna pour it into my bowl. So we will just put all of that in there. Set this aside. Okay, and then your ingredients called for a block of cream cheese. Like I said, I already did half the recipe, so I took half of the block, but I still have this block left. So I'm gonna plop this half block into the cookie crumbs. I'm just gonna set that aside. And then I'm just gonna use my hands to mix up the mixture with the cookies. Once you've mixed your Oreos or your cookies with your cream cheese, you're gonna get a dough, a chocolate crunchy dough that looks similar to this. We're gonna roll those balls and make our bonbons. Hopefully you were able to find your Pop Rocks. Dollar Tree sells them 3 in a pack. So these are the 3 that came in the packs that I bought. Like I said, I already made half of the recipe, so I've already used 3 packets. But I'm gonna go ahead and just open these and pour them into this bowl so that I can roll my my bonbons into this once I get the balls made. Oh, and you also need a plate that you can put your bonbons on to stick in the refrigerator or the freezer for about 10 minutes just so they can firm up and chill. But I'm gonna dump my Pop Rocks in here. Now when you're working with the Pop Rocks, you might hear them pop a little bit, and that's okay. You're still gonna have plenty of Pop Rocks to roll your bonbons around in. So I just mixed all the flavors in together. If you want to, you can separate the flavors and maybe have some that are watermelon flavor, some that are strawberry, some that are tropical punch. But I was actually hoping for like a multicolor instead of worrying about flavor. But anyway, so I'm just going to stir those up real good so we can get some different flavors and some different colors on the bonbons. And then I'm going to go ahead and roll out all of my bonbons. I'm probably going to get a little over 12. I think with my last batch I got, let's see, I got 13, so, or maybe 14. So depending on how big you roll your balls will be how many you will get. So I'm going to go ahead and get started rolling these. Once your bonbons are all rolled, they are going to look like this. I went ahead and rolled them in the Pop Rocks, and I left a couple to demonstrate for you how we did that. Now, one interesting thing I learned when I split the recipe, when I did it the first time, I started rolling the whole bonbon in the Pop Rocks so it was completely covered. If you want to have some Pop Rocks left over after you've dipped your bonbons in chocolate, I recommend just dipping like half of the bonbon. You're still going to get a lot of the pop when you bite into the treat, but I only did one side covered in Pop Rocks. That way I had a few left over once I've dipped these in chocolate because I want to sprinkle them on top. And I'll show you how I did that. So this is what I have left over here of my Pop Rocks, and I'm just gonna I just stuck the one side of the bonbon in, and that's all I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna do the same for this one as well. So I just put that one side on the bonbon, covered it in Pop Rocks. And now these need to chill for about 10 minutes. So I'm gonna take this plate and I'm gonna pop it into my freezer. We're gonna let those chill for about 10 minutes and then we will dip them in chocolate. So our bonbons have just a couple more minutes to chill in the freezer, and while they are finishing up, I just want to get my chocolate started because I don't want it to be completely hot when I dip the bonbons into it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get it started. So I have a bowl here that I've been using for the chocolate that I've been melting, and I'm just gonna reuse what's in here because this is what I used on the other half of the recipe that I made. So it's still fine to use. But I'm gonna add about 8 ounces of almond bark to my bowl, and then I'm gonna microwave it on about 2 minutes. So there's 1, 2, so I need 4 of them because they're each 2 ounces each. There's 3, and there's 4, and that should give me plenty to dip my bonbons in once they come out of the freezer. So like I said, I'm gonna put that in the microwave for 2 minutes. I'm gonna check on it, stir it up. If there's still some chunks, but it's pretty much melted, I'm gonna leave it at that because the rest of the heat from the melted chocolate will melt the chunks that are in there. Our bonbons are finished chilling, and I have melted our 8 to 10 ounces of chocolate here in the microwave. I did that on about 2 minutes time, and then I checked it and stirred it. It wasn't quite done, so I put it in just for about 10-20 seconds more to see, and it was pretty good. So I've let it cool just a little bit because it was pretty hot when it came out. But now I think our bonbons are ready to be dipped in our chocolate. Very simple, we're almost finished, and then we get to taste these delicious treats. So we're just gonna take the bonbons, and I just put a couple in at one time, so I can manage probably about 6 in there at once. You can kind of hear them popping, so don't be alarmed, that's okay. Some of the Pop Rocks, when they get wet, are going to pop, but you have lots of Pop Rocks on there, so there will be plenty to give you that popping effect when you eat the bonbons. So I'm just gonna take a spoon here and I'm going to coat the bonbons. I'm just gonna kind of scoop the chocolate over the bonbons to cover them and make them completely white. I don't really move the bonbons a whole lot. There's not really any reason to because I want to make sure that the Pop Rocks stay on. So once they're completely covered, I just scoop it up with the spoon like this and just kind of lean it against the bowl and let the extra chocolate maybe drizzle off, and then I just plop it back down on the plate. These are going to be delicious. They smell delicious. When we were mixing the cookies with the cream cheese, there, I'm just going to cover that one off, and I'm just going to continue to coat my bonbons with the chocolate. All right, so I'm on my last bonbon. I'm scooping out of the chocolate here. And I'm hoping that I haven't taken too long, that the bonbons are still, that the rest of my Pop Rocks are still able to stick to the top. So I'm going to put my spoon in here, and then I'm going to sprinkle what I have left of the Pop Rocks on top of the bonbons to give them a real festive look and just a little added pop to them. So here we go. So I don't have a whole lot, so I'm just going to sprinkle a few on there. So on this half of the bonbons, I followed the recipe just like we did now, but I had a little bit of hot fudge left over in my refrigerator, so I heated it up and I drizzled it over the bonbons. So that's what's on top of those. They have a little bit of hot fudge. I am just going to, you know what I'm going to do? Because I have a couple that I drizzled first that are not, the Pop Rocks aren't sticking to them. So I'm just going to drizzle a little more of this melted chocolate on it to basically get it wet so that I can drizzle some of these Pop Rocks on there. I do this one right here. There we go. The rest of them, Pop Rocks seem to stick on them, so I'm just going to, there we go, that's better. These are looking great. I will tell you, I've tested one already, and the flavors of the Pop Rocks really come through, which was great. I'm glad that it did. On top of the chocolate, the creamy chocolate inside, and then this almond bark hardens as it dries on the bonbons, and it gives it a little bit of a crunch. So there we go. So this is what our bonbons look like with the Pop Rocks sprinkled on top. Awesome. So however you guys decide you want to make those, I'm sure they're going to turn out fine. For our last tasty treat, Accio pumpkin pasties. Okay, well, our final treat does involve the oven. So if you need help with this part, make sure an adult is available before you get started. Pumpkin pasties are a baked pastry pocket stuffed with a spiced pumpkin filling. You'll find pumpkin pasties in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which is book number 1, and they're referenced in chapter 6. When Harry is on his way to Hogwarts for the first time, he takes the Hogwarts Express, of course. To get there, what other way would you get there? And Honeydukes, the sweet shop that you find in Hogsmeade, has a sweets trolley that comes through the Express on their way to Hogwarts. And that's where Harry is introduced to some magical treats for the first time, and pumpkin pasties is one of them. My inspiration for this pastry came from a library book called The Unofficial Harry Potter Cookbook. It was written by Dinah Buchholz, and I'm using the filling portion of that recipe, but I'm using a store-bought pastry crust. The ingredients that you need for this recipe are a cup of pumpkin pie, or not pumpkin pie filling, but pumpkin. So it looks like this at your grocery store, and a cup measuring. You also need a 1/4 cup of sugar, and that's what's in here. Granulated sugar I'm using. You could also use brown sugar if you wanted to. And then we need 1/8 of a teaspoon each of cinnamon and nutmeg, right? Yep, nutmeg. Okay. You will also need a pastry crust if you're going to not make your own. You'll need an egg for egg wash to brush onto the pastries right before we pop them into the oven. You'll also need to have a little bit of water. That's how we're going to seal the pastry. How do you guys like my pygmy puff over here? I borrowed that from someone. Okay, so I already have a cup of pumpkin in my bowl here. And I'm just going to scoop out a 1/4 of a cup of sugar and pour that in my bowl. I'm going to get 1/8 of a teaspoon of cinnamon. And like I said, I like to put a little extra in there, so that just goes in there. I'm going to kind of set this off to the side. And 1/8 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to stir that up real well so all of the spices and all of the sugar and the pumpkin get mixed. This is going to be our filling for our pumpkin pasties. I hope you guys enjoy your week at Hogsmeade. Be sure to check out all the other events that are going on through the library this week. Just go to our events calendar and take a look. I think Miss Anna from our admin office is going to do owl origami today as well. There should be a recording for that for you to try it ahead, and she's going to do a live event today as well. In case you had trouble making your origami owl on your own, she's going to be there for some help. The next thing we do is just prepare our crust. Here is my store-bought crust. I'm going to roll this out right on my countertop. You do what you usually do at home. You may have like a pastry mat that you can roll out. This particular crust was in the freezer, and so I had to set it out so that it would get to about room temperature before I could do anything with it. It is a square. The one that I used yesterday, because I made some pumpkin pasties right here, was a circle, and it was a refrigerated crust. So this one had to sit out a little bit longer to bring it to room temperature. And I did pop it in the microwave for about 15 seconds, just to kind of help it along, just to kind of make the process a little bit quicker. So, but I want to get, this one's a little bit thicker than my other crust. So I'm gonna use my rolling pin again, and I'm just gonna flatten it out a little more. And I'm just gonna roll it over just a little. It's not going to make it much larger, but I just wanna make sure I'm getting the most out of my dough. Now, I did forget to mention the next thing that you're going to need is something to cut out, a circle to use to cut out your cutouts for your pumpkin pasties. I found this at my house. It's about 5 inches diameter, which to me makes a pretty good size pumpkin pasty. We're gonna fold them over so they're half moon shape. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start cutting these out with the top of my container. So I am going to be able to get about 4 pasty dough crusts out of this puff pastry pretty easily. So what I have here, because I didn't show you that, was I got a cookie sheet and I put some parchment paper on it so that the pasties won't stick to the pan. And that's how we're going to put them in the oven to bake. I also have already preheated my oven to 375. That's different from the recipe that's in this unofficial Harry Potter cookbook. And the reason I did that is because I didn't prepare my own crust. This is already prepared, picked it up at the grocery store. And when I tested it out last night, I found that I didn't really need the oven to be at 400, which is how this recipe reads. So I went ahead and turned back the heat a little bit and preheated my oven to 375. And I'm only going to cook the pasties for about 20 minutes. And then I'm going to check them to see if they need a couple more minutes. Okay, so I was able to get 4 pieces of crust for my pasties right there, but I did have some scraps from my dough. So what I did is I'm just going to go ahead and put them all together, and I'm going to flatten them out the best I can with my rolling pin, and I'm going to try to get one more crust out of there. It's not going to be real pretty. My the other crust that I had that I made ahead of time, it combined a little bit better, but let's see what we can do. This one may or may not turn out very well, but we'll see what we can do with it. Okay, and then we're going to go back to our pumpkin mixture here, and we're just going to take a tablespoon. This is probably going to make more than you need for 4 or 5 pasties. But if you have 2 crusts, it's probably going to be an ideal amount for maybe 8 or 10 pasties. So we'll just keep filling. Do another teaspoon here. That might have been a little too much. So what will happen if you overfill, it's just gonna, the extra pumpkin's just gonna squeeze out. The object is to try to just get the right amount in there so that too much doesn't squeeze out. And with this little bitty one, I'm just gonna do a little bit of pumpkin. It's gonna be a really small pumpkin pasty. There we go. Okay, now to seal these pasties up so that they can go into the oven, you're gonna take your water here, and you are going to dip your finger into the water, and you are just going to wet the edges of your crust. Just like this. And then we're going to fold them over and make them half moon shape. And these edges should stick to each other. It makes it sticky. And so I'm just going to fold it over like this. And we're just going to kind of crimp the edges of the half moon there. And you can see this is what we're doing right here. And I've got a little bit of pumpkin coming out. So that's all right. You can either wipe that off however you want, or just leave it. It's okay. All right, so I've got my first one done. I'm gonna dip my finger again in the water. Go all the way around that circle. You know, you don't have to have circular pasties either. I started to grab a container that was a square that really would have had a good shape, and then I would have had like I would have had triangular pasties, which would have been fine too. You can get creative with it. The reason I didn't choose that was because it was a 6-inch diameter, and I would have made fewer pasties. So I wanted to make more pasties and not fewer. So I chose something with a smaller diameter. So a couple of my pasties I really overfilled, so the pumpkin really came squeezing out when I tried to fold up my pastry crust, but that's okay. I just kind of cleaned them up, and this is what I came out with here. The next thing you want to do, I'm just going to move my water out of the way, is take that egg and crack it in a bowl or a container. And I went ahead and whisked it up a little bit. I took just a fork and I want to mix that up real good because I'm going to use it as an egg wash. This makes the tops of our pastries turn out really shiny and crispy. So if you can't use egg, you can eliminate this step. That is no problem at all. It won't change the flavor. And then I have a pastry brush here that I'm just going to put a little bit of the egg wash on top of the pastries. Some of my pasties are really full. These are going to taste delicious. And the very last step before we put them into the oven is to create some venting slits in the pasties. We do this because as the pumpkin bakes and cooks, it creates steam, and we don't want the steam to build up inside of our pastry. So we just cut some slits in it, and I'm just going to put 3 slits. I took a sharp knife, and we're just going to create some slits, 3 in each. Make sure it's really going through. Mine, okay, there we go. A couple of mine made an indentation, but it didn't actually cut the pastry or the crust, so. All right, I'm done. So now they look like this. They have their slits in the top and their egg wash on the top to make them nice and shiny and golden. And now I'm gonna just put them in the oven. Again, I set the oven at 375, and I think if you are using a store-bought crust, that's going to be plenty warm. And then I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes. I will check the pasties. If they aren't quite the golden brown I want them to be, I will just put them in for another 5 more minutes and just kind of watch. Well, we waited 20 minutes and our pumpkin pasties have come out of the oven, and don't they look delicious? They smell wonderful. I wish you guys could smell them, but you will soon enough when you go to make this recipe. You can tell that our pastries came out a little bit differently. Let me try holding one. These are the ones that just came out of the oven. And these are the ones that I made ahead of time. So what has happened is I had a couple of pastry crusts in my refrigerator that were left over from other desserts. A lot of times you buy them and there's a package of 2 and you don't always need 2. So I just used what I had in my refrigerator. This particular pumpkin pasty was made with a pie crust, a refrigerated pie crust, and these that we made today were made from a puff pastry sheet. So you can see they're a lot puffier than the ones that I made ahead of time. I'm gonna go ahead and plate these and put them with the other pumpkin pasties. I cannot wait to share them with my family. I know that they're waiting as well. And here's our little one right here. He turned out just fine. He had a little crack in him, But that's all right, he's gonna taste delicious anyway. Well, I enjoyed my time making tasty, magical treats with you today.